Good morning, all. It's 26th of February 2025, and it's our Climate Action Committee meeting. Might just start us off with a karakia and then pass over to Karen. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E hia ke ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Right, thank you all for being here on time, since we had a meeting before this as well, or close enough to on time. We've got a health and safety statement on page 5, which I think we can take as read, considering we're all regulars here. And then apologies, I haven't actually received any. Do we have any from anyone else? I might just put lateness for Tipa. She did say she was coming online today. Quite there yet. Yep. I'm happy to move those. Anyone happy to? Thanks, Stu. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Awesome. Confirmation of the agenda. We've got 7.1 to 7.4 today. I might move those as well. Someone second? Ben? Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Great. Any other disclosures of interest in regards to any of these? Nope, then we should be all good. All right. I suppose there's some minutes here to receive. Confirmation or receipt. Right, so they've been included, but we don't need to. We still need to receive? Yeah. Thank you. Changed it recently, didn't we? So, Pamela, are you happy to just receive the minutes? And Mike? All right, all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. And all our admin for the start. I might hand over to Karen briefly just to have a chance to say something as well.
Thank you, Chair, Atamarie, councillors and guests and staff. Yes, today we have just four items on this agenda, but the first two are very important with respect to the role of this council for monitoring and providing assurance to council that this organisation is meeting its climate change commitments and obligations with respect to climate change mitigation and adaptation. So as you'll recall, this council has taken an approach where it is incorporating climate change response into all of our activities, our projects, our programs. And so while that is really becoming a very effective way of ensuring that we are responding to the changing climate, it also creates a really interesting reporting exercise as we see how cross-cutting climate change actions are. So those are the first two reports, actually just providing you with that assurance. The third report is on an update on all the tools and information that we have available to our regional communities. And this also is an area that Council asked staff to keep them apprised of so that you can talk to your communities about how we can support, how they can get the information, the most up-to-date information to support and enable their own decision-making with respect to adaptation in particular. So our Regional Resilience Lead, Rick Leifting, will be in for the item 3 to talk about the new tools that we will be releasing very soon. And then item 4 is a presentation from the Energy Efficiency Commission, who have been looking at the regional energy transition arrangements for this area. And there's very promising results that will help us understand how do we transition in the industrial space in this region, what the opportunities are, what the barriers might be, and how we can progress. And this information will finish the inputs into our impending update of the regional energy strategy. So really looking forward to welcoming them. About, what time are we expecting them? About 10:30? 10:30. Cool. So we'll get underway with the first item.
Yeah, on those first two items, I mean, I'm just noting that there are only 2 meetings left of the Climate Action Committee in this triennium, and then there'll be whatever comes with the election. And so I would challenge the committee to have a think about how we're going to transition should the Climate Action Committee not be in its own form like it was this triennium and the previous. For example, if the Climate Action Roadmap update comes to council, full council, then how would it look like? Maybe start giving Karen a bit of suggestions around that as well. But yeah, other than that, Karen, did you want to say anything further or take it as read, the first item?
I think we'll take the first item as read, but maybe if we can invite Joy Moore to the table, she can certainly help answer any questions.
That'd be helpful. Thanks.
Through you, Chair, though, I wonder if we just quickly highlight, because I haven't got a presentation for this particular item because I was going to take it as read.
Yeah.
But just if I can draw your attention to the areas and opportunities for improvement that we've identified as a result of reviewing all of our activities against the 5 recommendations of the Office of the Auditor General with respect to how councils are responding to climate change. So recommendation 1 was to take opportunities to collaborate with and assist each other, that's councils, to understand the current and likely impacts of a changing climate on their infrastructure and communities. And in your report, there is a comprehensive account of all the many ways that we are working with other councils to support them with their adaptation and mitigation activities and how we are working together. I just draw your attention to the staff comment that presently there is limited capacity to work on some areas such as emerging hazards such as wildfire risk and heat. We would very much like to be able to meet the demand, which exceeds our ability to deliver at this point. We are working on prioritisation so that we can have a transparent approach to allocating Waikato Regional Council time. And there is also responding to new or unplanned areas of work. And the Lagoima regulations, for example, is one area where districts are saying, can we all work together, please? And can the region lead? But we are talking about this, and there are certainly efficient and effective ways that we can provide that collective response. And really the key point that we've talked about across all sorts of work programs is we do still need central government direction, and that lack of clarity and certainty about legislation does make it difficult to advance with confidence.
Do we have any update on when that's coming? Because it said a suite is coming in Q1 of 2025. I'm guessing we're in that right now. So have we heard any whispers?
Yeah, no, there are 3 lots of legislation coming out, and so there's LIMS update that we're actually getting tomorrow,
Right.
and that will be coming out in the middle of this year. There's national adaptation guidelines. Yeah, they are coming at some point. And then there is another set of legislation that's coming that's to do with the risk and hazard as well. So there's 3 lots that are due at different times throughout this year.
Okay. Yeah, we look forward to those.
Yeah.
Ben.
Oh, just a question. Some of the work we're doing with Whakamatunga and the other areas was initially looking at government funding coming through a climate adaptation pot of money.
Or at least how and who pays
Yeah,
being
yeah,
defined.
How and who pays. Is that still on track to happen?
To that detail of that particular aspect, but I can certainly find out for you. But I would imagine if the funding has been agreed, then it would be on track.
No. It's still being consulted.
Yeah.
The consultation has been ongoing, and the date has yet to be determined. So again, still uncertain.
And the whareka will work and then progress once we have direction.
Carrying on just quickly, recommendation 2 was to make clear in climate strategies what our climate-related objectives are, how we intend to achieve these objectives, and how we will use strategies to set priorities. Yes, we've got the RPS, we've got the Regional Land Transport Plan, we've got passenger transport, we've got the Climate Action Roadmap and Biodiversity Strategy, for example, to show how we have incorporated and set priorities through these areas of work. Further opportunities for improvement are through our climate risk disclosure, which will make very clear why we are prioritising certain activities of work and importance of having those within that sort of risk framework and how to mitigate and manage risk. Also, as we will be talking about for our last item, the regional energy inventory will support both this council but also other entities throughout the region about energy efficiency opportunities.
Could you just define where the climate risk disclosure will be reported to? Like, when will it come to us here, or a council or another committee?
Well, because
And when?
we were going to bring it here and also then to risk and assurance.
Yeah, that's where I thought it would go. Great.
Recommendation 3, we did have some discussion about this at our last meeting about strengthening the use of performance measures. And this is an area that we have good performance measures for our corporate emissions, very clear, very measurable and time-bound. But we do believe there are other service level and internal performance measures that we could indeed improve and tighten just to give greater transparency and clarity of what we're working on and how we've achieved them.
Yeah.
And related to that is recommendation 4, setting out how climate-related activities are governed. And also, how do we ensure that we know what you need?
Yeah, because I noticed, and especially in that next report, the long-term plan projects are obviously widely discussed, vast, and have milestones and timelines and things. But when there are other commitments that may not have been funded currently through the long-term plan, it's hard. And they're in a high-level document like the roadmap, which is strategic direction setting. We don't yet sometimes have the SMART goal and knowing when that will truly be completed, or whether we all have the same idea of whether that is then completed. Because it might, for some, just be a small part of the region, and some may have assumed it was going to then apply to the whole region, or in a time frame that is this triennium or next.
Through you, Chair, if I can please just emphasise the importance of using the roadmap, because we can only report on what Council has agreed to fund.
Yeah.
Because nothing is in play until it's funded. And so if in the roadmap you see commitments that don't appear in the long-term plan, that's then a point of discussion.
Yeah.
That is this something that must be pursued? And if so, how do we get the funding to make it happen?
Yeah, because the roadmap is talking about a lot of projects which will have a very long time frame. I think it'll be really important for councillors at any point in the triennium, any year, especially coming up to budget time, to have that opportunity to say, but what about commitment 107 or 52? Because if we don't get prompted to do that, we might miss something. And then, as we know, before you know, our annual plan or long-term plan is done and the triennium is done, and then you feel like you haven't did what you wanted because it was in a document within 109 things. Yeah. No, great, thank you.
And then just finally, the recommendation. Sorry,
I agree with where Jen's going there, because in terms of our corporate emissions, it's very cut and dried and you can see straight away, but there is a risk with, it's something I'd like to bring up in the next report actually. I've got quite cross-eyed reading some of it, and it's very easy to read that same report again in 5 years' time, and on some of that stuff, go, have we actually done anything, or we just made commentary that makes us feel better, you know? And I'm not saying it's easy to achieve, but I do think we need to be really honest with what we have achieved, or have we just spun a whole lot of spin doctor stuff.
Yeah,
Councillor Kneebone, we absolutely agree, which is why we've been bringing this to you to say, let's have a conversation about it, because we really want to get it crisp, clear, and as you say, very honest.
It'll be interesting to see how that looks if it comes to council level next triennium, should it do, because you don't have the time like this committee to delve.
Because look, I think it's all governments throughout the world fall into that trap, because politicians want to sell a good story, and we need to be careful we don't fall into that. And I think it's inevitable we do to a degree, and some of these directives, such as these ones, to be more, to report, often incentivize us to produce these great reports that make us feel get better, but don't actually, because the whole intent of this is to remind us that we've got to be performing, rather than try and produce a report that looks like we're performing.
Yeah, and be happy with our pace. Mike.
Yeah, just interested in the page 18, the staff comments on part 2 of it, just about energy.
Mhm.
I've asked the question before, I think when about a year ago, just with the new geothermal stations that come online, is there account, is there, like we talk about transport in the main artery route, for all transport trucks and the emissions that go through there, can we counter that by these new power stations that are opening up that are pretty much neutral, clean energy? We've got Tahara Station, which is opened up to our north. We've got Te Huka that's expanded theirs. I know I understand the corporate part, but then I also understand that there's also what our region does outside that, because there's a balance. That's what I'm talking about, because we've got high transport, you've got emissions up there, but we also got stuff that's good, that's lowering the emissions, coal energy use, or even, hydro dams. I don't know how much they use compared, there still might be a certain footprint on that where we're getting lower with geothermal.
Through you, Councillor Downard, yes, we keep track of the regional emissions through our regional GHG inventory, which we have up until now been doing every 3 years. And it has been a very labour-intensive role. And it also has started sort of overlapping with Stats New Zealand's regular emissions for the country, where it does a regional breakdown. But we're coming up with a new approach, which will be an annual regional GHG inventory shared with all the regional councils in New Zealand, and I think some of the districts as well. Is that right, Joy? And if you could just let us know when that will be coming on, so that we can respond directly to Councillor Downard's question.
There's been a project that has been initiated through Bay of Plenty Regional Council to actually kind of bring all of as many councils that are interested to use the same platform that is from an Australian organisation that do the similar thing over in Australia. And the intention, and there is some MFE funding with it, so that all of the regional councils and district councils that are interested can start collecting the same data and sharing the same data at that kind of community and wider regional level. So that's been ongoing since March last year, and I believe it's in the contract negotiation perspective with the regional councils from the shared legal entity that helps to do shared
Services.
Thank you very much. But data has already started to be collected, and I know that we've provided some, and Bay of Plenty have as well. So it is a process in transition. I would like to think next year that we will have something to share, but it's definitely taken a little while because of the amount of people that have showed interest. But there is very clear desire and intention across the whole of New Zealand to kind of do the same thing, which I think is a really good positive step forward.
But I think that would be helpful if we bring back more detail for the next meeting, and we can talk specifically to your point there, Councillor Downard, about how do we measure the positives and the emissions against our regional profile. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I didn't know about that in that much detail. So, that just sounds so good, the sharing and the collaboration. And noting last time we had that report, there were so many concerns about how difficult it was to collect some data. Hopefully with the oomph of all these councils, we might be able to find someone who can help with that, because it's been something that's been ongoing. Yeah.
If I may just, obviously the data will still is only as good as the data that we've got. So,
of course.
Yeah, so it's still a work in progress to get to that nirvana of having.
Hoping there's extra oomph to improve it.
And visibility of being able to share it is a lot easier. Will be a lot easier.
Thank you. Okay.
And sorry, and the final recommendation was, as always, related to the importance of communicating internally and externally via most appropriate and relevant engaging channels. And to that end, we are updating our communication strategy to see what fresh eyes we can bring to that.
Yeah, and on that point, when I've been touching base with the territorial authorities, I think that comms to the community piece could be one where we can do more collaboration on, or at least I've heard it both from councillors and staff that could be useful. Otherwise, you've got 12 times, 11 times in the TA style and 1 time in the regional council style, developing messaging for people that live just an hour's drive away from each other. Yeah. Thanks. Are there any comments on any of those recommendations or other ideas to staff to consider? Oh, thanks.
Happy to second. I just also want to note, I think it was probably related to the first one, the sort of, I don't know, I guess unofficial mahi that Jen's been doing, just talking to some of our other politicians at district councils to try and generate that sort of cross council TA support to, yeah. That's all part of the.
I can give a bit of an update on that, just that the plan is to hopefully get around just over half of them again before the training ends. And that's because the topic will mainly be adaptation. And so we know from our strategy and policy update, we already have 3 councils that are going fairly well in the adaptation space, TCDC, Haraki District and Waikato District. And so this is to nudge the councillors in the other districts to start thinking about when are you starting your conversation with your community and your prioritisation. It all kind of comes together. And the first ones up will be on the 19th of March with Matamata Piako District Council. And I think I've got about 5 councillors joining to so that we can be councillor to councillor, as well as the great information that Rick and Whitney and others will share. And then Hauraki District will share. And then there was another one scheduled with Waipa so far for the 24th of March. We'll just see who else is interested before July. So,
Nice.
but I do definitely still hear that how much they appreciate when councillors turn up to see other councillors. And I think when we have a topic to discuss, that gives us a good scope to stay within good boundaries, reason to be here. So on that first recommendation, I only had just, because especially in the later report, it talks about how we have found savings with the collaboration stuff. What are our other options to collaborate more still, and how can we make those happen? I would love to get some feedback from the TAs of what they would like to see us do next training further, and I'm not quite sure how to do that yet, but that would be really good. And yeah, I think we do need to, as a council, keep asking ourselves, are we resourcing appropriately? Because when I go out and I hear, we asked regional council for some support on this, and we heard no, that always makes me anxious about, especially when it's in the adaptation space, because it's about preparing people for what could be a high risk situation, and I want us to be able to support. But that's obviously a resourcing and budget discussion, but I just want it to keep coming back. All right, then I think we had Mike move and Stu second, and then anything else? Otherwise, all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Joy and Karen, for that one. Then we'll go to item 7.2, the Climate Action Roadmap update. And thanks, Clyde. I see your comment there. It's just in support. Yeah. Go ahead, Joy.
Good morning. I am just sharing my screen. So while I am bringing that up, as we've discussed, this is the latest update from June 24 to December 24, and we are apologies for just Wanting to get my screen shared.
We'll just bring up the presentation through Brooke. Thanks.
Apologies. Okay, I'm not quite sure why I can't. I've tested it already this morning, so.
That's all right. It's coming up shortly.
Anyway, so the Climate Action Roadmap report is, we have been doing this now since December 2023. So as an organisation, we are beginning to get really comfortable and really understand what is involved within the roadmap. And as you know, it is based of 9 pathways. So next slide, please, Brooke. Next slide, please. It's based on 9 pathways that feed directly and align to the strategic priorities. And the purpose of the roadmap is to enable the Council to respond to climate change, invite discussion and collaboration with others, and agree on solutions for a more environmentally sustainable, productive, and climate resilient economy. And as such, the roadmap's commitments increase the ability of Council and the region to reduce climate-related risks and proactively respond. Right, and as you will see in front, we have the latest scores on the doors. I think it's really important to share that because there are 9 pathways and 109 commitments, and we've already talked about the breadth and the width and the scale and of all the projects that are happening, that finding a way, and again, we've mentioned this already, finding a way to report this well is an art, and it is a developing art for us. And so the comments made earlier about how do we do this better, we're really on board with trying to find some smart ways of doing this, because a lot of when we look at the commitments, they're very kind of aspirational, directional, conversational. So changing them maybe in the next roadmap or thinking about how we report them to enable some clinical, more smart reporting is definitely something we would like to do. But we are where we are and we're doing really well. And there is a lot more signposting of commitments to people's work, a lot more understanding of what is of importance to share. And as you'll see that of the 109, we've got 79 in progress, 10 in planning, 7 not started, 7 awaiting central government, 6 completed. And some of them obviously will take decades to complete. So this isn't a fast sprint to get 109 out of 109. It is very much a lot of work in progress. If you're interested, an example of one that is in planning is the water security management plan, obviously approved through the LTP, and they are doing some really detailed work now to ensure that it is successful. An example of something that's not started yet, when we think about renewable electricity generation, we want to engage with Māori to make sure they are part of the program. So there's a specific commitment to enable that. So when that happens, that will shift. So when it says not started, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, it's not started yet. Awaiting government. Oh yes, so we spoke earlier about engaging with the Climate Change Commission and central government on national climate change risk assessments. There is so further engagement with local government is planned and the final national assessment is due by the 3rd of August 2026. So there are things that we are waiting to see and waiting on government. And an example of one that's completed is, and again, this is I'm just giving you examples. 9.4, review existing mechanisms through the council's, which the council distributes funds, such as the Regional Development Fund. We're not using that anymore. That's been closed, so we've completed that. So that's not in the report, but those are just ideas for those numbers to give you an idea of how we are framing each of those. Next slide, please, Brooke. And so essentially, we are 6 months in from the LTP process. And if we do take a holistic view, hopefully what you would have noticed in the report in front of you, that we've done a switch. So instead of saying, here's 109 commitments and here's the actions very specifically against each one, we've taken it from a key program, an activity that has been funded through the LTP, and then assessed which commitments fit better with or fit with those particular programs. Hopefully that's easier for you to see good progress and where we still need to do more. And obviously we're only 6 months in, so it's very easy for me to say that we are on track, and it's very easy for me to say there's no significant issues, because that's where we are. Obviously, as we go through the next year and next couple of years, more nuance will be able to be seen as the metal hits the road, so to speak. Next slide, please. What I do want to spend a minute on is complexity. Solving climate action is not a straightforward 1 to 10, we do this and we achieve action. There is a lot of interconnectivity and a lot of complexity. And reflecting on the work that is, the programs that are happening, it's very clear to see that where we might do some work in one program, that it actually has quite a significant impact somewhere else in another pathway or another set of commitments. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes just explaining how that's appearing for me and whether that brings any questions for you. If we take the pathways of biodiversity and biosecurity, that is a complete program. It includes business as usual programs, activities, and also new activities. So the LTP work that's been funded for that pathway will enable that pathway to be completed over time. The same logic is for coastal and marine. It's a complete package reporting against it. But if we look at the deliver on flood protection and land drainage, which is essentially the infrastructure strategy, that actually impacts 7 pathways. And there are over 30 commitments that are either directly or indirectly impacted from that program. So if we deliver that particular program really well, from a climate action perspective for council, that will be a very good success because of the impact it has across all the different pathways. And then if we look at Lake Waikato and the Fungamarino wetland, similarly, even though they're water-based and regeneration-based, they actually will have a positive impact over 4 pathways. And I'm keen to kind of share this because it's not easy when you start working through the roadmap to kind of see how they all interconnect, but actually the interconnection is the key part of the success. And the review of critical funding, though that's aimed at in its direct sense from an infrastructure strategy perspective, depending on that review, will determine what else is available for other programs. And I've thrown out zero emission buses as one example. So again, all these programs, though very directional in their approach, actually have quite a massive interconnectivity. And for me, the more we can highlight, oh, and I've missed sustainable peatlands. Let me just tell you this one. So sustainable peatlands have one commitment, 7.4. The whole program is developed around that one commitment. And yet what comes out of it will have a massive impact on our knowledge base and our understanding base to achieve many others. And yet it's just one commitment. So for me, the complexity of this roadmap is really quite interesting if you take a systems approach to how we deliver and how we support climate action. And therefore, the more we can highlight and increase the connections and really improve our understanding of how they have an intended and unintended consequence on each other, and how we share those connections and interconnections, will create a maturity of how we are responding. So I was quite interested to share that with you because I think sometimes we miss the opportunity that they all have collectively. Thank you, Brooke. Next slide, please. And
Sorry, could I just
yeah, go for
get
it, Pamela.
you know, it's interesting how you've described that because often when we think of a roadmap, we think of one road that's heading one particular direction. And what you're explaining is that this is much more of a a
Spaghetti
woven
jacket.
tapestry,
100%,
right?
yeah.
So have you got any thoughts on how we might more effectively convey this, not only within council here, but also to our communities? How do we take a systems approach to this?
We need to understand where the best interventions are.
Mhm.
So when we look at the 109 commitments, which of the 109 commitments will have the greatest impact because they create a material impact that then triggers
Mm.
other ones to follow. If we try and do 109 all at the same time, you don't get maximum efficiency and maximum effectiveness. So being able to, if you take, for example, when I think about the infrastructure strategy, for me, that is one of the most important because it covers water, it covers land, it covers energy, it covers hard and soft assets. It covers the community, it covers levels of service. So so just sitting in that space where it covers resilience. If you hold that one really well, then its interconnections and its ability to enable and support others becomes quite interesting, certainly from my perspective. And for the community, understanding systems approaches is complex, but yeah, finding a way to share that would be I think a useful thing to do.
Just reflecting out on what you've shared, I think that where this committee could really assist progress in this council is being able to articulate what you just did. Because if this committee was able to say to council, hey, the infrastructure strategy is where we are going to make the greatest amount of gains, therefore that is where our resourcing should go, because we know that this council is very focused on fiscal efficiency and ensuring that where we're collecting rates, we minimize that as much as possible, but we invest those in the places that are going to make the biggest change. And so I would really love to see this committee be able to send a very clear direction to all of council that says from this committee's point of view, from the terms of reference that this committee oversees, here's where we can get the greatest bang for buck. I think that would be really effective in moving this council along.
Yeah, and if I can reflect what you just presented about the interconnectedness for the LTP programs, that would have been really great to see in the business cases in a succinct way like you presented it, or because now it has been funded and it's great, but that's where it would be nice. And I noted at the time, yeah, it would be good to have your involvement to help our staff understand that as they're writing those.
So that's the beauty of the maturity of this whole pathway
Yes.
and roadmap.
The
We're
integration.
starting with a load of, we need to do all of these things. We know we need to do all of them and they all have a material impact. So that's stage one. Stage two is, okay, how do they interconnect with each other? Stage three, how do we prioritize from those interconnections? So for me, it's the maturity of understanding how we can leverage off the roadmap in a smart way. Which then, yes, there are some smart measures we can use, but also we need to be able to sit comfortably in the complexity of this as well, which is where then it becomes more difficult to kind of report in that very clinical way. So there's a real fine balance.
Yeah.
But systems thinking, and this is a systems program, is very useful to kind of sit in this space.
I think if this update report comes to full council, for example, I note in here it talks about how all the different committees that we do have are responsible for all these work streams to even get to the point of an LTP business case. If council can keep having that front of mind every 6-month memo of what are the top impact areas, for example, in each committee members to be aware of in finance and services and integrated catchment, then having that front of mind will really help those committees drive that. And I'll pass to.
I really agree with that. I almost think, I mean, this report goes to council anyway as part of the process, but to be honest, I don't think council are going to read it. I mean, I got a bit cross-eyed reading it too, but what would be good would be a really good executive summary based on this conversation we've just had.
Yeah.
For that reason, yeah.
And
yeah.
for me, yeah,
Well, it's got to be pretty succinct, eh?
yeah.
It gets very
And
complicated.
I'd say
going to talk to that
the
point later.
table that you have of which ones have changed status, why they've changed status, for me is the most interesting part, because that's where the changes happen. Most of it's otherwise ongoing. So that might help you shorten it to focus on those, because then we can, with our governance hat on, critique. You say this is complete. I thought this was going to be a different,
Yeah.
but that's where the SMART goals will come in. I'll
So-
finally let Karen have a say though.
Oh, look, thank you for this because, thank you,
Well-
councillors, you brought us exactly to the point where we were heading to, is that the roadmap was actually part of behaviour change and a culture change program. How do we support all of our staff? How do we support councillors to understand the extent to which we must start thinking about the impact of climate on our lives, but also how we influence the climate through our work programs? We established in-house the Climate Action Roadmap Advisory Group, a cross-council group of staff, which has become truly quite an effective functioning group looking at these system changes. We are now at the place where the roadmap might be something that we have hidden behind the scenes in our work programs, but reporting to council is now really important to us because it's actually an LTP measure. So the first report we bring to you will be for this financial year, and it will be looking at what are those big projects that we've funded or big portfolios of work, because we have now our portfolio approach across, for example, the Regional Resilience Programme. Huge impactful programme there. We've got the Nature Plus programme, which actually shows how we have a landscape approach to biodiversity and emissions reduction. Really big idea, but easy to grasp, understand, and for people to actually get on board with if it's something that they can contribute or want to contribute to. So I think we have 3, 4, 5 big areas of work that would be useful measures that incorporate almost all of these commitments that we would be reporting to council in a way that is very clear, easy to understand, and actually quite exciting, the direction we're taking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I like that when they are in the programs, there are tangible bits of work that are much easier to communicate with each other and the public on, rather than that climate big, vague thing that really stops a lot of action or triggers some people. Whereas if you, get what I'm saying. No, that's really good feedback so far. Joy, did you have something else you wanted to say?
Just one last
Yes.
slide. I'm very conscious that
Oh, going okay.
we're
Okay.
but great conversation, super conversation. I just wanted to just bring your attention to just a couple of other elements that are developing. One is in November, we spoke about the emissions ruling that we were gaining from MPI for Neesville Road towards our carbon neutral plan for 2050. I'm pleased to say that we finally had the ruling back and we have 37 hectares eligible within the whole 240 hectares that we can actually register for ETS credits. Next step is to kind of really think that through from a pros and cons perspective and what are the options. Do we apply for the money? Do we, but even if we do and it goes on the register, it may not get sold. So that there's lots of options that I need to work through. But I'm really pleased that there is eligibility, and in the next report, I will come back with options. I'm very open if anyone's got any suggestions and ideas on that. And
Yeah, Ben.
yes.
Just on that, it would be, seeing we've been through that process, there may be other farmers or landowners who are also contemplating the same. Could we also have a teaching process about how hard it is, the costs, and
We've
how
learned
long
a
it
lot.
takes.
yeah, because most of them won't even try it because of the hurdles. So
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
was
we-
definitely an interesting learning process. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Good
Yes.
point.
Yeah. Okay. And then we.
No, Stu?
Just on that, Ben, too, I think, through Chair, 37 hectares is quite a big chunk of land in a Waikato farming sense to retire. And I think, as you alluded to, next step is it worth going down this track for that portion of our bigger 200 years, which will be a critical. So that's where often that tension is, before we start going down the track you're suggesting,
And we're still progressing with the other case studies and looking for opportunities, right?
Yeah, and
Is it
everything
more-
was, we wanted to know what we could get from Neesville to then kind of understand how we might use that in relation to the others.
Cool.
But
So you
there's a
mentioned
lot
those
of-
in the report that what you're updated.
Yeah, thanks. We have continuing climate change alliances with Waikato, Tainui and Rokawa. So that is those relationships and alignment of climate strategies between council and iwi are continuing. And we are also, you would have seen on Appendix 2, we've taken the roadmap framework and we have drawn out from our corporate commitment partnerships with Maori, the opportunities and actions that we are actually having at the moment from an iwi Maori perspective. Tudahanga is here if you have any questions about that, but we're really keen to kind of keep developing that as a way of being able to really see how we are managing in that place, in that space. Gosh, that wasn't worded well. But those are great ways that we're actually continuing to share information. And then
If I could just update the committee, there's a meeting happening that I'm attending to try and keep pushing this along as I suppose the member of the JMA that we've got with Waikato Tainui. It's happening next Monday. And it is, I've invited a councillor and at least one staff member from Hamilton City and a Waikato district to join us from regional council with Waikato Tainui. So trying to get this holistic look at things. And the nice thing is there's an all of council JMA hui with Waikato Tainui on next Wednesday, a couple of days later, where we can then come together to reflect on how well that got off the ground. So yeah, just trying to really get a lot of people in the same room to make it easier for Waikato Tainui and to not have us duplicate across the councils when we're trying to progress the climate strategy that they're just working through. Thanks.
And then very quickly, and this kind of goes to the point we talked earlier about legislation. I've actually got the list of what's coming out when. So work on understanding and adapting to natural hazard risk is a busy space. Nationally, there is adaptation legislation planned by the end of this year. National direction on national hazards are due at the end of March, and regulations around hazard information on limbs also due this year. So a little bit better explanation than I gave earlier. And to help integrate and align all of this work with this upcoming legislation, with all the work that is already happening, this kind of strategy is being pulled together so that we can just align everything and make sure that all the action that's happening is aligned with the new legislation and the engagement that we're having around the region is all interconnected. And that was it.
Just related
Yep.
part of question, please. I meant to ask before, I saw that question about the relationship between hazard information on limbs and the local government Lagoima request. Can you just flesh that out? What's going on with that one?
Where are we up to with it as
Yeah.
well?
Yeah, that came out of the climate adaptation plan that homeowners, residents, property owners needed better information.
Yeah.
And the legislation was to ensure consistency of reporting.
I was around consistency of reporting.
Yeah, and so that the right information, the correct information, enough information is gathered.
Yeah.
And shared consistency. Yeah. So it's the information, and that's coming into effect July 1 this year. And I've got Whitney nodding her head because as our risk specialist, she knows all about this.
Yeah. On our TA counterparts, so the councillors and the districts are grappling with this, and some are more comfortable than others for sure.
And I
Yeah.
think the team probably will talk to this when they show us their tools that they're going to be using, because this is all part of that release of information to ensure accuracy and up to date and how we will be supporting this piece of work. Nice segue.
Great. Were there any other questions for Joy on this update? or feedback on the report layout? Oh, in that case, Mike, do you want to move? And Pamela, second? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you all. We're halfway through. Then I'll invite up,
Just wondered,
yes, Brent,
will we finish Rick's one within 5 minutes? Because I noticed Ika's online already.
any thoughts, Karen? Did you want to juggle anything around? Or shall we?
I think Oliver, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that you're okay until 12?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah, I'm happy to wait around until called upon. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Oliver. Yeah, hopefully find the next one interesting too. Thanks, Ben. Just good to ask that question. All right, then I'll invite up Whitney and Rick, and we'll hear about the tools and modelings and the updates. Loving seeing all the collaboration on data and models and tools. Keep it up. And the cost savings we thought we'd get, to hopefully, as you say, coming to fruition too. Got it, Rick.
Waikato. Yeah, if we can maybe have the first slide coming up.
Rick will get that for you.
So look, I'm obviously assuming that you've read the memo and
Absolutely.
the data sets and the explanation and summary of each of those. So I won't go in, we won't go into each of those in depth. However, happy to be guided about the conversation. If there are any questions and specifics, then we can do that. Before we go any further, although this is from the Regional Resilience Team, and we have Whitney Mills beside me, and we have Celeste Davies-Corway and Stephen Cornelius in our team, who have been I think the catalyst for a lot of this work. But it really is a collaborative approach, not just internally, and we have great support from our SPI friends, with our spatial team and our science team, but also with our TA partners as well, and also iwi. So we're very, really happy that we've got a good network and connection, and we're all thinking the same way, which is great. So if we go to the next slide, please. So we're really acknowledging it's not just a regional resilience team, it's a cross organisation and a cross region approach. So the data sets that we will be talking about are primarily where we can show actual pretty pictures, because some of the modelling information is still being worked on, and we do need to be quite careful around letting loose that information when it's ready. And there's a lot of work being done to make sure that the models, specifically flood modelling, is done to a standard that we're happy with and that the communities are happy with as well. So I'll explain that a little bit more. We'll also be talking about showing some pictures around our coastal inundation layers and some of the differences of the new information coming, landslide susceptibility mapping, and also an exciting opportunity for Waikato Regional Council with the hydro network as well. So there is the quick summary overview of what was in the report. Maybe just through the chair, are there any specific questions about any of those projects that perhaps the councillors would like a little bit more information on before we go much further?
They all sound interesting to me. I was hoping you'd have a slide of a picture of each, but
Yeah, and look, we can have another discussion at the end once we go through the
sure.
information. So
yeah, we might go back to that slide right at the end to just double check if there's something.
So
Yeah,
just one question, Rick. How reliable is the land instability, susceptibility stuff proven to have been in light of what's happened in recent times, of its predictability and that sort of thing, or is that a bit of an art rather than a science?
It's probably more a science than an art. It really is, because it is based on physical properties of the soil, slope as well, and also just the other mechanisms. But primarily it's geology and slope is the main ones, and they don't really change a lot. So where we have seen, particularly with Cyclone Gabrielle over the summer of 23, is that where there was a landslip, it wasn't a surprise. That's why the particularly on the Coromandel Peninsula, and when we show the map, you'll see that you'll be able to see that that's an area that's been highlighted. Now, the level of, I guess, accuracy is very important to understand, and it's very much a regional scale data set. And so, you sort of want to look at it and maybe sort of squint your eyes a little bit as you zoom in, because, it is not there to inform a building consent. It's there to raise a flag going, hey, if you're doing something in this area and it's in a likely landslide susceptible area, then you probably want to do some a little bit more work. And it's very much aligned with the liquefaction level A information that we already have. So it's very much a flag waving exercise to say, hey, look, here's some information that shows the potential susceptibility or not for our areas.
So it's unlikely to be able to inform our decision making, for example, as to where it's appropriate for carbon forestry and things like that. And it's probably going to be too blooming late before we have it anyway, given the way that's marching across the country.
Yeah, well, the other perhaps ephemeral input into landslides is the land cover. And while you have the underlying geology, the appropriate land cover may actually increase the resilience to land subsidence with the or decrease exactly, and especially if with deforestation, for instance, it actually may exacerbate the situation.
Thank you.
And just a quick comment from me was I was in one of the Hamilton City steering group meetings for climate just the other day, and they were going over how they're going forward with Resilience Explorer at the moment. So if you could touch on that sometime before the end, on your thoughts, that'd be great. But we'll let you just go now.
Great. Now, next slide, please. So hot off the presses. So this, we've had ongoing conversations with Waipawa District Council about some of the modelling that they've been doing. And they've been doing it without any funding from us, but we have been there in the technical realm in terms of providing technical advice on the modelling. So Waipawa District Council have approached us and say, hey, it might be better for Waikato Regional Council to actually bring the models into our realm. And for both of those models there, we've had technical input through Steve Cornelius, mainly in terms of making sure that the information is robust enough for us, or being quite clear what it should be used for. So that's just a further couple of data sets that we'll be working with further with Waipawa District Council on incorporating, hosting it on our hazards portal, and also being able to help Waipawa District Council in terms of the ongoing modelling work. And we see this actually quite aligned to our regional modelling work that we're doing as well. Same software, the consultants that we're doing it with, they're our friends in terms of, we like working with them. So it does actually align really well. So those are the two ones that aren't in the report, but I just wanted to highlight to this committee here that those are two data sets that that we'll be working on to come through onto our systems.
Awesome.
Yeah. Next slide, please. Right, pretty picture time. So, so this slide really does cover the Waikato water resource modelling program or project, and also identifies the the collaborative work that we are doing with our councils as well. And I just wanted to explain that there's models and models, and what we want to be clear on is making sure that the community and the users of these models understand the use and the limitation. And I mentioned before the landslide susceptibility and level A as a bit of a flag waving layer. That phase one work is your flag waving. So it's really a very simple, from a hydrology perspective, we have the LiDAR, the topography, we literally put some rain on top of it and we see where the water goes. It's very much a layer that is going to provide us with an idea of where the more susceptible areas to flooding are. And we are wanting to cover the whole of the region. So those are two, those are our two biggest catchment areas, which is the Waipawa and Waikato River from Lake Karapiro downstream, and the entire Waihau and Piako and system, as well as encroaching into the Karonga and the Wharekaua coast as well. So that there is to ultimately will replace our current regional flood susceptible layer, which was very much a compilation of observational information from people just basically drawing on a map and saying it flooded here. So this is, and it's been useful, it has been useful, but we know that it wasn't 100% consistent across our region. This will provide that consistency. You'll notice that it's just a one blue color because again, we don't want to give that impression that we understand the flood depths well. We just want to say, hey, if you're in this area, then you probably want to think about potential flooding either currently but in the future as well. Now, when we start to work more with our TA partners, that's when we're getting into the phase 2 and the phase 3. So we've completed phase 2 for the entire Haraki catchment, and we're now working on phase 3, and that's to inform the Haraki Plains adaptation planning work. So that's quite exciting. We have also, and that's where the modelling is being funded by Waikato Regional Council. As an example for TCDC is that's being funded primarily by TCDC and led by TCDC, and we're providing assistance to TCDC both on a technical and on a funding level as well. And that's also, that modelling is almost finished, so that's again a phase 3 model, and that's going to really assist both us and TCDC in understanding flood hazard and exposure and then risk as we go forward.
So Rick, I was wondering, what is the next area on the map that you would want to roll out phase 2? Is that something like Matamata Piako because it's part of that catchment that you already have more detail for, or is it Waikato District because they're a little bit ahead, or you've always been interested in the Lower Waikato?
We have, yeah, and look, it is the way that we've been doing things is well, we are Matamata Piako are working, and we're working with Matamata Piako on their phase 3 modelling for the urban areas, so that'll feed into this as well. And the same for the Lower Waikato as well. So we can do those sort of concurrently.
Okay.
And we've geared up in terms of our hardware. We have a flash new PC that we can utilise for modelling. It's got lots of cool, colourful lights, so I think that's a good thing. But also gearing up ourselves in terms of our technical capacity as well. So we're wanting to do that phase 1 modelling to cover the whole region in-house. And then we'll be working with our partners around what do we need for the phase 2. Generally, the phase 2 work, we can do most of that as well ourselves. Okay. When we get in the phase 3 work, we need our partners to assist with that, mainly because they could use that modelling for some of the internal processes as well, and we want to work closely with them around that.
Are you feeling pretty comfortable that's just going to roll out at a good pace, or do you see any barriers from your perspective that could be nudged away?
It's always resourcing at our end, internal resourcing to have the human capacity to actually do some of this work. So working on it, and we've got a plan, but it is dependent on what else comes into our small team in terms of the business as usual that we need to deal with as well.
Okay, so on that, I just have one more question, then I'll let you carry on. When Cyclone Gabriel and others, hail, etc., happened, we went quite a bit behind on some of the work streams, not necessarily this one, but in the resourcing side of things, are you feeling like that we are more resilient now if another event happens next month?
We're better. I think in terms of the information that we currently have, and I'll also explain, I'll also talk a bit more about the HydroNet pilot project as well. We are better, but I can see an increase. I can see these are game changers for us, and I think the impact and of these data sets and our understanding of these data sets is going to change the way that we think and we work across the region.
Cool. Now, mention things when you need them, please, when each budget comes up.
Yeah, I think
through your managers.
Yeah, I think one thing that has come quite apparent is A model is only as good as the inputs you put into it.
Absolutely.
And what we're finding is that, and even within our council, but also all the other councils within our region and all across New Zealand, is the asset information is not that great.
Mm-hmm.
So by asset information, we're talking about culverts, all the assets that are used to manage flow, whether it be a pump station, a floodgate, a culvert's a big one as well. Those are the key things that if we don't do well, the model isn't representing reality as good as we can.
Are you talking about our assets or assets out there in the community? Both, yeah.
Yep.
Fair enough. Because we obviously can improve what we're doing.
And we are improving. Yep.
Yes, I've heard about that.
And having this as an example of why having good asset information is really, really important is a good example of that.
Okay. And do we have ways of nudging others when they need to be nudged to improve their asset information? Or do we need to look at how, so that they know that that's impacting us?
The
We have an average
TAs that
today?
we're working with, when
Fine.
they start to get the models doing, and we ask either us or the consultants are asking for this asset information, there is, they know that they're missing information.
Cool.
And the outputs of the model, then, we need to manage those uncertainties the best that we can, and have a plan to update the model. And I think that's the other key thing, is that when we're talking about a flood modeling methodology and plan, is that these models are always going to be updated. And we're always wanting to be able to represent reality as best we can, because we are wanting to use these for flood response.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really quite crucial that we understand the reality of our catchments, our systems, the best that we can.
It's probably something, Mike, that we can mention through the civil defence side as well then, about that asset stuff. Thank you. Carry on, please. Thanks for indulging me on that.
This is the last slide for the flood modelling. I don't know, Whitney, did you want to add anything to that? Yeah. So if there's no other questions about the flood modelling that we've been doing, then we'll go on to the next slide. So aligned with the flood modelling, and I do want to say that currently we have coastal inundation information and we have flood river information as well. We are wanting to bring them together at some point, but again, we're not quite there yet in terms of the technology and the information that we have, because there is a lot of overlap between inundation areas, whether they're caused by river flooding or by current or future coastal inundation as well. It's a one system. So what I just wanted to show here, though, is the layers that we have we've redone the inundation layers based on the latest 2021 LiDAR information. And we have been able to increase the area that the inundation layers covered. So if you look at that red sort of rectangle there in the bottom left, that shows the extent of the information that we had in the current coastal inundation tool. And you see it just stopped just sort of north of Port Waikato. And that was because our LiDAR information just wasn't up to it further up, and it was going to cause some further issues. So now that we have good LiDAR information, we're able to model using a very simple bathtub technique, areas that are at or below a particular water level. And if you look at this example here of the lower Waikato and just to remind you that the green areas are areas that may not necessarily be directly inundated on every tide, because there is some barrier there. In this case, it's our stop bank system. But those green areas still may be impacted by a future sea level because of the groundwater issues and things like that as well. So we still want to highlight those areas. So what you can see there is for this particular scenario, which is the present day mean high water spring, all right, a high tide. And you can see the elevations, particularly up into getting into the Whangamarino wetland and into some of our other schemes, how low those land areas are, but how far away from the coast they are. All right, so that again, I think is really, really useful to give some understanding around the susceptibility and the challenges that we have with our drainage and flood protection schemes because of it's just very low land. Next slide, please.
Just,
oh, sorry. Yep.
so very briefly, and you may not know this, but that stuff up by the Whangarino there, Do we know off the top of your head if that's been exacerbated by our land use practices, or has it always been?
It's always been pretty low, and much of that lower Waikato area was swamp. So, so again, this the inundation layers are based on a snapshot of the ground elevations in 2021. Next slide, please. There we go. So let's add a metre of sea level rise, and we're also using the upper storm tide range as well. So we've raised the water level along the coast, and you can see there immediately, particularly in the Aka lowlands, that with our current flood protection, that green area has turned blue. So that means that that area has been overtopped, those stop banks. But you can also see the increase in areas that would be below that particular sea level scenario, which is upper storm tide plus 1 metre of sea level rise. And again, looking into the future, using the inundation tool to understand, well, what are the future challenges that we may have in managing those systems.
Just a question on that. So that 1 metre sea level rise, when is that predicted? When is that anticipated?
Off the top of my head, the current projections are by 2130, between 1.3 and I think it's about 1.8. Don't quote me on those. That's just off the top of my head, but we do
that
have
is
it
recorded. Just saying.
Yeah. Had his disclaimer.
Yeah. So that 1 metre sea level rise. Look, there's a table that does provide that, and that's off the current inundation tool. But the 1 metre, its current projections is around about 100 years, maybe less. But look, I don't have the information.
I suppose that the only reason I wanted that context is obviously when we're putting in infrastructure, flood pumps and the like. I mean, we don't anticipate that infrastructure to last for 100 years. So I'm just trying to get a gauge of if we're making infrastructure decisions based on a projection that's 100 years in the future. Well, that's not. I don't necessarily feel
there's a best practice way to do it that Rick knows more about than the rest of us. But it's, as I understand, it's the short term where we have quite certain predictions, and as soon as you go out to that far in the future, like 80 years or 100 years, it's quite a wide set because people are still arguing about tipping points and ice sheets and other things. So.
Yeah, and I understand that, and perhaps there's some context that you're going to get to hear from me, but I just am a little cautious when we put images up like this that we do give that context of the time frame of these impacts, because we don't want to make short-term
and the margin of error of that.
Yeah, we don't want to make our shorter term decisions based on 100-year predictions, or do you know what I'm saying? I think you know where I'm getting.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that the tool, and we've had the tool in place since 2016, it's a conversation starter, and it's again very similar to the other regional scale data sets in terms of raising that flag, in terms of, hey, we need, if you're doing some work in those areas that may be impacted in the next 50 to 100 years, let's have a bit more of a think about what a changing sea level is going to have. And so we then start to identify further work to look at that. We're not saying that with this tool that those areas are going to be, you're going to have sand and things sloshing up against the Whangamarina wetland. What we're saying is that the impacts of sea level rise have a wider reach up at the catchments. And
that's the message to take from that.
Yeah.
Happy with that message.
Right.
Great.
Yep.
And I just have a question from Clyde as well.
Sure.
Yeah, look, hi, thanks. When I was in council like 10 years ago, like I think it must have been the one you touched on there, Oliver, with regard to modelling. So there was a model sent out to the communities, and especially on the Coromandel area, showing, potential flooding and inundation, etc. And it caused a bit of alarm, given the property owners thinking, well, that's the end of me. I'm on the coast and we're going to be underwater. And it's had an impact on their property values is what the concern was. So that was 10 years ago. How's that flooding going at the moment? How much sea level rise has there been in the last 10 years? And I also will state it's important to be very careful about not overdoing the modelling or alarming people unnecessarily or for whatever reason. I agree with taking caution and using modelling to help adapt, but there must be caution taken with regard to causing alarm unfairly. So my question is, in the last 10 years, how much have we actually seen tangible sea level rise? Thanks.
Yeah, and look, that's a great question. It's a question that we get a lot from our communities because we are talking about projections of sea level rise. Now, those projections, the current information that we have does.
I'll just carry on. It's fine.
Okay. Those projections, based on MFE guidance from NIWA, start around about 2020. So, and based on a 2005 baseline. One of the items that we had in the report was the NIWA tide gauge analysis report, which was to give us the latest information of what have been the measurable differences or changes on our sea level. That's almost finalised. We've just got a last little bit to work with NIWA on exactly that in terms of how has sea level behaved over the last 10 years and how does that compare to the projections of sea level rise. So please, if I can just ask to be a little bit more patient for that one, because it's really, really important. What I can tell you is that the mean sea level changes that have occurred have exceeded the projections. But we need to be very cautious that these are annual mean sea level points, and we know that we have climate cycles of various time periods. So it's very tricky at this stage to disconnect a underlying sea level trend from your underlying existing cycles. Now, we're working really closely with NIWA because they also see this as very important at a national level because we're tying in our adaptation planning work with signals and triggers tied into a sea level and a sea level rise trend. So rather than using an absolute change, because we know that the sea level fluctuates, is understanding, well, what's the underlying trend that we want to then base our signals and triggers on doing some further adaptation action. So that's still a bit of a work in progress, but I absolutely agree is that we need to show exactly the best that we can what's happened and how does it align to those projections.
I really appreciate that because it talks the same point Pamela was
Thanks.
making, and I've heard around the traps at the districts as well because it comes up with the slim stuff, etc. Thank you for that. Really appreciate that. There's about 3 slides left.
Yeah. So look, this is really the tool. Our inundation tool needed to be updated. So again, we talked about the layers. So the layers will be updated, but the vehicle that we have in terms of the background architecture that you see, that's had to be updated as well because the software behind it was becoming phased out. So we have a new tool. It looks very, very similar. Look and feel of it's very, very similar. The main difference is we've lost our little slider functionality, and now you've just got the buttons. I feel
okay.
Yep. That's not as cool, but but look, the other key thing is that this has been a collaborative project in terms of the inundation tool with Bay of Plenty Regional Council. And so Bay of Plenty Regional Council actually within their own staff, their spatial team, have built this new tool so that both councils can use. Waikato Regional Council actually provided the inundation layers for Bay of Plenty. So it's been a great collaborative process, and it's been pretty much, and it has been all internal staff between the two councils to produce this latest version. So Bay of Plenty have this up on their system. I'm not sure whether it's up yet. I can't remember. It is up. Yep. Now they do call it a little bit different. They call it a sea level rise viewer as opposed to a coastal inundation tool, and they've they had internal discussions around what to use it, so we'll leave it to them. But the basic architecture is the same.
Okay.
Next
Bring a
slide.
few more councillors along and then we can all decide on one name.
That's right. Yeah. And look, this is just a image of that landslide susceptibility. So again, there's the region wide. Just have a look at the again the key there. So the orange is the possible landslide susceptibility, and you can probably see there for the Coromandel, that doesn't seem too out of place there. And then we've just zoomed into a particular area. I won't say where that is, but some people might be able to pick up where that is. And just to show you a little bit more about that detail. One thing to be clear about though, and again, the color coding and you've got the possible, the undetermined, and the unlikely. That's the same sort of legend as we have for the liquefaction work as well. Okay. Now, the undetermined is mainly in our urban areas because that's where things do get a little bit tricky. And we don't have that resolution and that clear understanding in those urban areas about landslide because there's a whole lot of other infrastructure going on there. That's why we've just said at this scale, it's a little bit too hard. So let's just not go there.
Will someone else do that, like the districts?
I'd be hoping so, yeah. And, that's, again, there are national initiatives as well on understanding landslide susceptibility as well.
Stu, you had a question on this one?
It's just interesting. Look, there's a lot of rural subdivision around Waipa, and on a lot of it's on hillsides that you can have rushes on them. You can see they're very wet, and just looking in as a layman, it appears that they're not being selective in terms of where it can go, but all they're making people put in these horrendously expensive retaining walls, and you sort of I can't quite work out whether there's any design to those retaining walls in the sense of understanding the susceptibility of flood, or whether they're just putting in, we think it's got to be so big, so they put them in, and the cost is really enormous. And just from what I've seen over the years, I'm not convinced that they're fail safe, because if something starts much higher up behind these houses, 200 or 300 metres up, then I don't think retaining walls going to do
much. And that's where we sort of shift in terms of roles and responsibilities, and that's more the onus of the territorial authority in terms of building, consenting for a subdivision or as part of the building consent, but also in terms of the structure itself. And so we don't tend to get into that. If it's a big subdivision, yes, but again, when we're working with our TAs around their growth strategies, then this is a really good bit of information to say, hey, no, this might be a bit, you might need to think a bit more about land instability or flooding or something else.
Housing affordability if you go on that yellow bit, because you're going to have retaining walls.
Exactly. And so we don't tend to get into that detail, but we definitely want to make sure that people are aware that, hey.
And I mean, even with flood modelling, that some of the rural subdivision stuff, there's no detailed flood mapping susceptibility for those areas. And I've never seen, I know there's places where there's houses where I've never seen it flood in 50 years that I've driven past my whole life, but old timers have told me they've seen it underwater, but no one in the current generation knows that, so they go ahead and put their house there, and there is a chance that they'll have a swim at some point, and it's a swim rather than a get washed away sort of thing.
Yeah, and we generally have a pretty good relationship with our TAs in terms of reaching out to regional council and the expertise that we have in-house to assist TAs in terms of assessing their consents. While we don't want to get too involved, but we are there to say, hey, you probably want to get this checked out a little bit more in terms of flood susceptibility. And particularly Steve and Duncan and our team, they're very good at picking up where there are some irregularities or where a consultant probably needs to do a little bit more, or where it's great. I think this is our last slide. So I really did want to highlight quite an exciting opportunity for Waikato Regional Council and our communities. And this again, while there's been a lot of talk of post Gabrielle and the work that New Zealand needs to do in terms of understanding our flood resilience and response. So this work was actually started before that. In terms of working with Met Service and saying, hey, look, we've got some pretty good information, we've got some pretty good data sets. We know yeah, but we can do better. And so we've worked with Met Service, and now through the HydroNet project, which, if I explain it, is that Hydrologic is a Dutch company. The Dutch government have a scheme where they want to help the Dutch companies explore other markets worldwide. So they have a fund. It's to enhance, particularly around the water side of things and flood response. And an application was put in from Hydrologic, collaborating with Met Service and also another consultancy called Water Technology based out of Australia. And they put an application in, and that was successful. And we found out about that at the end of December last year, and we're only just starting that process. But it's just about $1 million worth of external funding coming into the Waikato region to work with us, and we're the beneficiary of the project. We have put in some seed money. It's about $50K a year for the next 2 years, which is what we sort of pay anyway for our flood emergency management. So it's part of our budgets. And while we're called the beneficiary, we are working very closely with with the team to ensure that what we're getting is what we want. And the aim is we've got 2 years to work on that. And after that 2 year, we'll have a working system that we can then carry on with after those 2 years. The important thing, though, is that we're not just doing this on our own. We're not going down some pathway. So we've got the alignment, or at least we've got a good in through myself and others on the National Flood Warning Steering Group, and also NEMA as well. So they're very interested in this as well. So it's a I don't want to say a model, but it's a new way of not so much a new way. There are other regional councils who have similar systems, but we're wanting to be able to look at what's best for us. Obviously, having some external funding is a big motivation to use this product. But what we're quite clear on is that the tools that are provided for this can be interoperable to other councils as well.
Awesome.
So yeah, we're not just going down one path and nationally going down. We're being aligned on this and
Nice.
taking advantage of that external funding.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, I just want to talk about insurance. You were cautious you spoke at the beginning about being cautious about releasing some of these tools too soon. Are you aware of people who have lost insurance or can't get insurance since we had the floods in 2023?
I don't have the exact details on that, but anecdotally, yes. At least either not getting insurance, or the premiums have shot up, or they're I've forgotten the term now. What do you the excess?
Yeah.
The excess has increased. So the flood insurance doesn't kick in until a certain amount. But I do know that where we have had flood protection put in, and this is over historically, where we have, and particularly in the Thames area, where from the 2002 weather bomb, where houses that weren't able to be insured were then able to be insured once a stop bank or flood wall was put in. But definitely it's something that from the insurance sector is a lot of pushback, but Whitney's got some thoughts on that.
And just the second question on that is, I understand that in terms of flood protection, Hawke's Bay Regional Council is currently being sued by its own insurance company for the failure of the stop banks. And the Bay of Plenty's also had an insurance company suing them for stop bank failure. So when you look at your Port Waikato scenarios, there's risk here for the regional councils.
And that's what we're working on at the moment, is understanding our systems, our risks, and how our flood protection systems currently behave, and how that might change in the future. So it's a very big concern for us, and that's where we do need to work with communities. And I think the Hauraki Plains is a really good current example, where we're getting the modelling to undertaken to get a really good understanding of the what ifs, and what can we do to manage those currently and in the future. And we're talking about how do we manage stop bank breach, how do we manage overtopping as well, and how that might change in the future.
We might dive into detail with that on risk and assurance. Is that right, Karen? Yeah, we have in the past as well. Okay.
So we've got projects in play to help us understand that risk profile better.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. Bruce?
You just made a comment. We understand that the information is highly sensitive, but there's also another risk, a legal risk, about non-notification, not letting people know what we know.
That's right.
And then being sued for that too. And if you travel through the Hawke's Bay at the moment, see the road signs are replete with signs pointing out this matter in relation to Hawke's Bay Regional Council.
Really interesting with those cases being to follow how transparent they've been with all their maintenance and all that sort of stuff. Because I mean, there's probably two parts to it, isn't it? Whether you've been looking after it properly, and is it fit for purpose in terms of what you say it's going to do? Yeah.
Pamela, did you want to make any comments on, like, the council obviously will delve into this in future at the right point? Are you aware of it coming as a topic anytime in the near future?
You're talking about the
Just
the insurance
Yeah.
issue that Ben has. So we have been discussing that at regional sector.
Yeah.
It is highly concerning because it's, I mean, I don't know all the details of these particular cases, but if I operate on the assumption, I would love to be able to do this, that regional councils are maintaining their assets and meeting their obligations around protection of their communities. What concerns me is after the fact when your own insurers choose to exercise every avenue there is to get out of payment, and that creates a real difficult situation for councils as well as this country. Hey, well, and even beyond the boundaries of this country. That's how we interact with insurers, how we make sure that we're doing what's necessary.
Okay.
We'll
keep an eye on it as
challenging.
our council through the appropriate committees, and we will also obviously work with the regional sector to stay across it all.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
one other thing about the insurances, Whitney might be something you want to add to that as well, is that, you know, through the service that we provide through our regional resilience team around providing information on flooding. I can't remember the numbers, but we probably have quite a few that actually come in specifically to say that, hey, we've lost insurance. The insurance company has said, we will not insure you. Now, the insurance companies have their own flood models.
Yeah, they're in data.
I don't think they're very good. I think they're not as accurate as some of our information that we have. And so we are able to provide further information, and in some cases are able to say, well, actually our model is showing you may not be as impacted as what your insurance company may say. So we provide the information that we can, and then it goes back to the applicant and the insurance company.
I really appreciate you mentioning that, just because I have heard around that, mainly from district councils and councillors being approached about the once council information is released to the public, then the insurance company will see it. But often they're reminded that the insurance company has their own data that they're using for their models. And so it can go both ways, obviously, not just in a negative way that was being perceived.
That feels like something LGNZ should be chasing up as well, because if you can provide information on flood modelling and stuff and it's peer reviewed, then the insurance companies should need a good reason to dispute it, if that makes sense, and vice versa. Yeah, but it's something we'd have to do collectively.
But it's also whether we should reduce the level of protection that we're offering to clients if you get these changes coming through on sea level, or, you know, are we altering, because the clients are the ones who are then saying, I've lost my house, I'm getting my insurance company to sue you, because we promised them that we were giving them a certain level of, do we have to alter what our level of protection is given the data that you're getting coming through, and what integration is happening in the council to look at that?
So in terms of what you're talking about there is that the level of service of our stop banks, and generally our stop banks go up to a 1% AEP level of service. So to manage a 100-year return interval flood event, We do have stock banks that have a lesser level of service. Some of them are a 2% or a 50-year or even a 10% or a 10-year. So it's around that education for the community about what sort of stock bank they are behind. But generally, insurance companies, their threshold, and look, insurance companies don't give this information out. It's a competitive market, so they don't want to say what their threshold is. Now, whether a particular community or property owner does or does not get insurance is not necessarily solely reliant on the hazard that they are in. Insurance companies also have a commercial understanding of the risk they have, and they don't want to have all their eggs in one basket in terms of a community, and they want to spread that around. So it may be that if someone does not get insurance, it may not be because they're explicitly in a hazard area. It just may be that they insurance companies might want to spread that risk a bit more.
And that's what I was going to mention. We've had some good conversations with the Insurance Council New Zealand, and particularly their natural hazard resilience person. And he has mentioned that everyone in New Zealand should be able to get insurance with some insurance company. It's just if you've been with a particular insurance company for so long and now you're not able to get your insurance or your excess has gone up, it's probably because they have put all their eggs in one basket and insured a whole heap of properties in one particular area. So then he did mention that everyone should be able to get it if you're shopping around and going to different insurance companies.
That's interesting.
So yeah, and he did say that, and they have provided to regional councils that if we are seeing a particular insurance company in our region not granting insurance, that it is something that Insurance Council can help us to investigate. Is it that, or is there something else going on? And also when we are releasing new information, new natural hazard information, and there is this big concern around insurance, that they can support, the Insurance Council can support us with some of that communication to our communities. And they did that in Nelson when that land instability modelling that came up at the end of last year. They were quite proactive with working with Nelson to try to support that as much as possible. So yeah, there's lots of things that the Insurance Council can do to help us support when we are having these kind of challenges that we're facing.
All right, Pamela, quick one.
There's the access to insurance, and then there's the affordability of that insurance. And so it's really easy to say, oh yes, you might be able to secure insurance, but if the cost of that is so eye-watering that it's the equivalent of pricing, the insurance companies themselves pricing themselves out of having to provide it. So
yeah, what we're aiming to do is be transparent around where our hazard areas are. And so it's quite clear, and there's no ambiguity between insurance companies and what we know as a regional council or a TA as well, and ultimately for our communities and our property owners.
Thank you, Rick and Whitney. Any last comments, Whitney, since you've sat there?
I just maybe mentioned on the resilience, urban resilience, since you were wanting to have that conversation with Hamilton City. So yeah, through Joy, thanks Joy, and the climate and sustainability people across the whole region, we have been looking at using the Resilience Explorer platform as a potential, it's a platform to help display risk to climate change and to support communities in adaptation. So Hamilton City Council has put their hands up to be a trial for the region in using Resilience Explorer to look at the risks to a lot of their assets and infrastructure. But through the Hauraki Plains Adaptation Project, we are also starting that conversation with them about using it for a local adaptation project as well. So across the region, we'll be getting some good case studies on different uses of this tool, and as well as using the tool to help inform decision-making and adaptation, but also an understanding of how much resource can we get back from using this type of tool in the council, like how much extra time can I have to support other communities versus, undertaking a big risk assessment that for Wharekau Coast took almost 6 months. So yeah, it's also a bit of a case study of how much resource can we get back from using this tool. So keep an eye on that. So that will be exciting if that comes to fruition.
No, I appreciate that. I might come back at some stage. All right, might move on so we can get our presenters, Oliver, ready soon. So I'll just move this item. And Pamela, happy to second. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried.
Yep, support.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick and Whitney. Did Joy want to come? Okay.
Speakers on. Very patient.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience online. So Oliver Howard and Sarah Clark I had, but I haven't seen in detail about who's online. Go ahead, Oliver, if you'd like to do a
Yeah,
better
kia
job than
ora.
me of introducing the Regional
problem.
Energy Transition Accelerator update.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, and we'll just bring up the presentation. Oh, if you
Uh,
could,
Yeah,
then
I'll share
then you
from
can
my end
control
just
it.
so I can
Yeah.
move stuff around.
Thanks.
But yeah, no, thank you a lot for allowing me to present to the Waikato Climate Action Committee. I think it's good to spread the word of the work that we are doing. It's just me that you've got today, no Sarah Clark. Let me just try to present in Teams and see if the technology allows me. That was a fascinating presentation to work through. I'm based in Wellington, but I spent a lot of time in the Coromandel, so it was interesting and a bit scary to look at the landslide and coastal inundation.
Make sure to remember all the
impacts.
disclaimers that were discussed.
Exactly, yeah. Just waiting for the technology to come.
Perfect. We can see that.
You can. Oh, I can't yet. Oh, no, here it is now. Maybe the government was trying to save some money and we've got slow Wi-Fi. So I'll just give a really brief introduction and some background, and then I'll kick straight into kind of the insights that we're getting out of the program. So, yeah, as Joe mentioned, my name is Oliver Howitz. I work at ECA. So we are a government agency. It's about 100 of us, mainly based in Wellington. And we run kind of programs all centered around mobilizing New Zealanders to be world leaders in clean and clever energy use. So clean, we like renewable fuels, and clever energy use is all about using energy efficiently. So under that, guys, we have this program called the Regional Energy Transition Accelerator. A bit of a mouthful, apologies, but the clue is kind of in the title. We have a regional approach on about the energy transition to renewable fuels, and through this phase of the program we're focused on industrial process heat. So that is the large energy users that are using fossil fuels for stationary energy purposes. So they're burning stuff but not going anywhere, and these are really focused on those largest industrial sites. So the process that we follow is shown on the screen. So we do have stakeholder engagement as one of the key principles of the program. So before we undertake any analysis, we have a stakeholder kickoff meeting with lots of the, well, with all of the key organisations involved in this energy transition invited. I think the photo is from the lovely Hamilton Jet Park Hotel where we had the kickoff meeting. After we've had that kickoff meeting introducing what we're going to do, we run detailed work streams that really gather lots of the information that we need in order to produce the insights for the program. So demand assessment really looks at who are all these large industrial users, where are they, how much fossil fuels do they use, and what are their projects that they could implement that would reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. So energy efficiency and fuel switching projects. We've then got another work stream, electricity work stream, that looks at if all of those sites identified were to electrify their stationary heat demand, what infrastructure would be required in order to support that. So these are very large sites, they're kind of indicated, so they would require upgrades to the electrical system. So that work stream is to look at all those upgrades that would be required. Another work stream looks at the biomass availability. So biomass is a fuel switching option. So that work stream looks at within the region, what is the sustainably available volumes of biomass that could be made available for bioenergy, and how much will that cost? We then bring everyone back together for a workshop, which has already been held for the Waikato region, and presents the findings from all the work streams and how we bring it all together, and gather feedback off the back of that workshop as well. And then after that, we present our final reports and analysis and share that back with everybody. That's due to be published in a couple of weeks' time. So that's enough background. Let's crack into what this kind of means for the Waikato region. This is probably a bit too small to make sense, but this is our study region that should align with the Waikato Regional Council boundaries. Sorry, I should have mentioned that I'm happy to take questions at any time as I go through it. I can't see people in the room with this thing open, so just
I'll jump in if need
up.
be. Yeah. We will.
So sites are located all throughout the region, from the south to the north, and then there are, you can see where the highways and lots of the
Yeah, it seems
infrastructure
fairly
is already
logical
around.
to where activity happens. Yeah.
And you can probably identify some of the large sites that you'd know of in your region. So those red dots, there were 91 of those sites. So 91 sites were included in our study, really meeting that large energy user criteria, which was using stationary fossil fuels and emitting over 500 tonnes of CO2 per annum. That may resonate with a few people in the room because that's also the requirements of the new national directions for process heat disclosure requirements. So those 91 sites used over 12 petajoules per annum of fossil fuels, and from the burning of those fossil fuels generated 730,000 tonnes per annum of CO2 emissions, predominantly using piped fossil gas as the energy source. There was a little bit of coal, a little bit of LPG, a little bit of diesel, but predominantly they're using piped fossil gas, which for historical reasons, obviously it's been the most available and cheapest fuel for lots of these energy users. So there's a breakdown of the kind of type of sites. So dairy industry is very strong in the Waikato region. They had the highest kind of energy use and installed capacity for all of their boilers or heat plants. Other industry in there as well. And we did include some commercial sites where we had some information about them. And so some of those commercial sites were below that 500 tonne criteria, but we still included them in the program because we had information. So that's the likes of, your Waikato Hospital, your swimming pools, and other sites like that. Just to comment on, that installed thermal capacity from all of the heat plants being, over 1 gigawatt, 1.1 gigawatts, that would take all of the, that's equivalent size of Huntly generation if that was just to electrify. So it is a very significant amount of energy that these sites use. So the way that we work through these sites is to look at our baseline, and then we go through and look at all of those sites and see what projects they've already committed to. What have they confirmed that they're already doing for energy efficiency projects or fuel switching projects or heat pumps and all that sort of stuff. In the Waikato region, we could find confirmed projects that would just account for 16% of the energy use, predominantly from some biomass fuel switching. So that leaves us with about 10 PJs of fossil fuel demand that hasn't got a confirmed project from that organisation. And then we work through the systematic process of how a site would first reduce the energy use and then potentially fuel switch. So the first step is always to implement energy efficiency and demand reduction projects. So that gets rid of just 5% more of the energy use. And then we look at the work that heat pumps could do, electric heat pumps, and that could reduce another 8%. That is a slightly lower percentage than what we've found in other regions. And the reason for that is a lot of the energy demands from these sites in the Waikato region is for really high temperatures. So the work that heat pumps can do is relatively small. So if you think of dairy, they need, steam at over 200 degrees in order to to dry their milk. And then wood processing sector is another high energy use, and they need steam as well. So heat pumps can't really do those jobs. And so one of the biggest focus of the program is those unconfirmed boiler decisions. So that 70% of energy use remaining for high temperature fuel switching. What could their options be? And apologies, a little bit of a technical interlude, because what follows will use the marginal abatement cost, or MAC. You'll see that a lot in the following slide, so I just have to explain it briefly in case you're not aware of what that is. So when we assess all these projects for these sites, we standardize all of these projects using one number, the marginal abatement cost. And it's illustrated here that the marginal abatement cost represents the cost of reducing emissions divided by the emissions reduced. So this helps us do a couple of things. It helps us compare fuels. So between the electricity projects or the biomass projects, which one's got the lower marginal abatement cost. And it also helps us paint a picture of when projects might be implemented, which is demonstrated by this. When we are seeing the marginal abatement cost for a project equal what we consider the forepath of carbon pricing, then that's when that project becomes economic for that business to implement. So under the hood of all the analysis, we've got the 20-year lifespan for each of these projects modeled out. So this is what it looks like. So we had 91 sites in the project, but each of those sites has got multiple projects. So we've got 200 odd or more projects that we modeled through demand reduction, heat pumps, and then fuel switching to electricity or biomass. And this is what it looks like. So there are 90 projects that are economic now without even a carbon price. That means the net present value of those projects is negative. It makes financial sense for a business to implement those projects. It's not to say that it's a given that these projects will happen, because there are lots of other factors that organisations have to consider in implementing these projects. They have to have the capital available, they have to have the planning, they might have to have site shutdowns and a whole lot of other factors that we can't model. We're modelling the economics of these. And lots of the larger kind of emissions reductions projects, if you see the trajectory of that black line, those 90 projects, they do only, well, not only, but they will save about 100,000 tonnes of CO2 per annum. But some of the larger emissions reductions are achieved from some of the more expensive projects, or higher marginal abatement costs, and that's because they are generally fuel switching projects, and they require very high capital investment upfront, and they also have relatively high ongoing costs of the renewable fuel as well. So we'll dive into some of that. So when we paint out the picture of all of those 200 odd projects being implemented across time by these organisations, we can see this trajectory of emissions reductions as those projects become implemented. So 45% of emissions reductions are modelled to happen very soon now. That's the combination of confirmed projects that we know about and those ones that have a low or very low marginal abatement cost. And then as time goes on, I should mention that I'm talking about the lower green line. It's called the MAC optimal. So that is the economic pathway. As time goes on, we see some of those projects get implemented, with some large projects happening towards the end of the period as well. And so that's happening, accelerating emissions reductions, or these projects a lot faster than BAU. BAU we consider businesses just waiting until they're required to by legislation change. So, ooh, it looks a bit ugly anyway. So in summary, like if we were to follow the economical pathway, by 2036, we would have reduced the process heat emissions from these sites by over half. So 380,000 tonnes is a significant amount. And especially if you were to consider that in a cumulative basis, not just a per annum basis as well. In achieving that pathway, there's 51 large heat pump projects, which would increase electricity demand by over 230 gigawatt hours per annum. Just a quick note on that, I did read through the agenda, and some of these values I had a typo in. So if there are changes made to the agenda, I need to update a couple of numbers. The economical pathway also sees 15 large biomass boilers be installed with additional demand of 490,000 green tonnes per annum of biomass. So that's a significant volume of biomass as well. To put that into context, it's greater than the current energy output of Nature's Flame, which is New Zealand's largest supplier of bioenergy currently. So it would need at least another supplier of that size to enter the market. And at around about $100 per tonne, per green tonne, that's a new market of about 50 million per annum for that fuel. So it's a very significant amount of energy, and obviously that creates opportunities for ongoing employment, not just in implementing these projects, but for the ongoing fuel supply. Now a note on piped gas. So in our modelling, we had to make assumptions about what these organisations are paying for their current fuel supply in order to compare against the economics of these renewable fuels. So, and we can play with those assumptions and say, what if the price of piped fossil gas escalated slower or faster than what we're assuming? And so the black is our base case. We were assuming a 3% increase per annum in the price of piped fossil gas, where the blue line just halves that, and it's got a much milder increase, and you see the emissions reductions is lesser. The interesting thing is when we increase the price of piped fossil gas, the yellow line, we're seeing projects get accelerated much more rapidly than our base case scenario, and that's that yellow line, where essentially we're saying if organisations thought that price of piped fossil gas was going to increase by 6% per annum, they're just going to, the economic decision would be to try and implement those projects now. So we'd see a lot of activity. Just to remind yourself again that we're just playing in kind of spreadsheet desktop analysis. If we were a CFO in a room just making a decision, this is what decisions might look like, but there are those multitude of other factors that businesses would have to consider in order to make these do these projects. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about piped gas as well, because it is very important. How long do I have, by the way? Just keeping on time.
We're okay. We were scheduled 12, even 12:30, so we're okay. But it's,
yeah. All right, I'll keep going. So looking at the economics for the project, so I showed you some marginal abatement costs and the trajectory of emissions trending down. So if your emissions are trending down, you're using an alternative fuel. What is that alternative fuel? So in our modelling, we essentially modelled electricity or biomass being the renewable fuel alternatives for the site. And what came out of the economic analysis is that biomass was the more economical fuel choice for these sites. And by 2050, it takes up over 90% of the fuel demand for these sites. So that's nearly of the order of 10,000 TJs or 10 PJs per annum, which was the equivalent of 1.4 million green tonnes of trees, biomass, sorry. Yeah, electricity, there is still a sizable demand, 900 TJs per annum, predominantly from heat pump projects. So let's have a look at, if we're saying biomass could be the favoured fuel, where could that come from? So I mentioned earlier we have a biomass work stream that looks at what is the sustainably available amount of biomass across the region. So they've looked at the existing extent of commercial plantation forestry across the region and looked at the forecast of how that will be harvested all the way out into 2050 given planting rotations. And so our starting point from here at ECA is to look at just the existing extent of forests. We don't want to, as a starting point, we don't want to advocate for planting more, and just look at what is the available residues, what isn't being utilized at the moment out of those harvests. So we're not changing the extent of forests, and we're only, as a first point of call, we only want to use what isn't being utilized currently. We don't want to divert what's currently being made into solid wood products, for example, go to bioenergy. So Waikato harvests, 3 to 5 million tonnes per annum. There's a variability based on what was planted 27 years ago, etc. And then from that, we look at what is unutilized out of that 3 to 5 million tonnes. And what we found in this region, oh gosh, there's a lot of words on that. Who made that slide? I did. What we found for this region that was quite unique compared to some of the other regions that we've been in is that there is very small amounts of unutilized wood fiber that comes out of all of Waikato's harvests. And there's a reason. The reason for that is there is a very high demand for that wood fiber, that low-grade wood fiber that would often be unrecovered on hillsides, forestry slash. And that's predominantly due to the pulp mill at Kinleith needing that material for its own operations, for internal bioenergy, and to create the pulp. So that means that a lot of the stuff that's created, because there's a market for it, is already being collected and put to use. They also take residue and pulp material from outside of the region to meet their demands. There's other demands for the type of woody biomass that could be made into bioenergy. So that's the likes of animal bedding. So we'd want to account for those usages as well. Across all the wood processors in the region, so we interviewed them and looked at what residues they're producing. When you saw a log, there's lots of little bits as well as sawdust that's created. And actually all wood processors had outlets for the residues already, so there was no spare material there that could be diverted to bioenergy. And note that obviously some things are changing in the sector. So, we already had the closure of the Kariori pulp mill and Tangiwai sawmill. So at the moment, some of that lower grade material that was going there is currently getting exported. From my window here in Wellington, I can see the Port Wellington, and definitely the number of logs that's been stacked up on that wharf has increased over the last couple of years. And I should note as well, obviously, in your region, there are known changes at Kinleith with them shutting down that P6 paper machine. So that will have an impact on their energy demand, as well as a little bit of a change in their demand for material as well. We haven't been able to include that impact in this program because it's still kind of evolving. All right, so putting it together, we've got the black line for what we're saying might be the economic demand for biomass in the region, and then what we consider to be the net residues. So out of that, 3 to 5 million tonnes per annum of harvest, how much residues are created within the region that could be made to bioenergy? Well, there's around about, and it fluctuates with the harvest as well, but around about 200,000, 100 to 200,000 spare available residues that could be diverted to bioenergy, which is insufficient to meet the projected increase in demand just from industrial process heat. Now, this doesn't mean it's a dead duck at all. It does mean, though, that we will need to supply these sites with bioenergy from other means. So that could be from two sources. So that is from residues that are sourced from outside of the region. So places like Northland, Te Rāwhiti, Hawke's Bay, even a little bit of Bay of Plenty has got the inverse of this. Their future demand is less than their net residue, so we could source some fibre from there. Or it could also dive into some of those lower grade logs, which currently are, as I said, put to export. A lot of those export logs end up in China. They have got a useful life of kind of 5 years as temporary construction material, and then end up getting burnt in boilers over there anyway. And so diverting those export logs to New Zealand for bioenergy isn't too bad from a sustainability point of view. I should note as well, this projected demand excludes what we're seeing from Huntly. So we didn't include Huntly in our Huntly Power Station in our RETA study, so we're focused on process heat, not electricity generation. But obviously Genesis have got relatively confirmed plans, and they're actively out in market trying to source 300,000 tonnes per year of torrefied black pellets to substitute coal. So 300,000 tonnes of that torrefied pellet would require 1 million tonnes-ish, or green tonnes of raw material to produce that. So once it's dried out, etc., you get that
smaller
lower
number.
mass. Yeah. But yeah, just to standardise, because there's different wood products, just using green tonnes, which is the mass of a tree when it's harvested at 55% moisture content, but you dry it down before you burn it in a boiler.
Interesting. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, hi. Hey, just curious. This slide here. Just curious on what that's based on, because my observations are that they're only collecting the sort of wastewater, for want of a better word, that can be used for biomass when it's, say, within an hour of Kinleith, for example. And Te Rāwhiti in those places, we know there's millions of tonnes of it, but it's not economic to collect. So have you factored in a value for some of this stuff to justify collecting it?
Yes, absolutely. So behind the scenes in the modelling, we've got where this material is being produced, and so we've got forests all the way up here in Coromandel, which would be a long distance away from a hub, and that has a transport cost associated with it, and that's factored in. And so we're using material at a cost point, which at a certain point it does become uneconomic to recover, which is what you're saying about Te Rāwhiti, that it's not being recovered currently because it is uneconomic. So we do have that.
Even like I live an hour from Cambridge, from Kinleith, and 2 years ago I harvested 10 hectares of radiata. We gave all the waste stuff that was left on the skid site to them. There's no value in it, or it picked it up off the paddock for me, basically. Yeah. So even then, it's still pretty marginal. It wasn't as if we collected it out of the paddock as such. We still couldn't justify doing that, even giving it away.
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
At most, it makes us conservative, doesn't it? Because there's potential for more if you had the money to.
Well, it all depends on how it compares to the price of alternative energy sources, really. Yeah.
And there are competing markets here, which we need to be careful about, especially from a policy point of view as well. But the same material can be used for pulp and bioenergy, and so it's a competing use. If a market was set up, then all of a sudden the price that Kinleith might have to pay for pulp will increase, because you might sell it down the road to the bioenergy supplier if it's a better deal for you than it going to Kinleith, and so there is that tension.
Okay, we'll keep going.
I just want to touch on what fuel switching kind of would mean for organisations, because it's all well and good presenting economic pathways and saying biomass is an economic fuel, but just really want to point out that it's not straightforward. So at the moment, most of these sites, as I mentioned, are getting piped fossil gas, and that's running their boilers to produce heat. And so at the moment, their fuel supply looks like a pipe, and it's got a tap that they can turn off. It's simplification, but that is very easy. You don't have the storage of fuel and a whole lot of other considerations. But if you move to biomass, all of a sudden you have to design your site to have X number of trucks arrive per day, per week to deliver fuel. You have to be able to store that fuel securely. You have to change your boiler and all your fuel handling. So you need mechanical conveyor belts and a whole lot of things. There are, as you'll be aware of this in the Regional Council, there are different air discharge consents that you have to consider, and resource consents and chimney heights to deal with particulate matter. So you need to design in scrubbers into that whole system where you didn't have to for piped gas. And also operationally, so biomass boilers are less flexible, so they've got a longer heat up time and a lower turn down. So a turn down means that if you've got a 10 megawatt boiler, for biomass, you could probably only minimally operate that at about 5 megawatt. So under 5 megawatt, it wouldn't burn efficiently. Whereas if you've got a gas or an electric boiler, if you've got a 10 megawatt boiler, you could operate that at pretty much any level while your process needs change. So
there's a lot that goes into it, eh? So if you've already got a coal boiler, it's a lot easier then to swap, because a lot of this is in common, whereas might even incentivize a few electric boilers because it's more like gas in the sense that you need a lot less of this stuff. We'll see what they decide.
Yes. And there's so I think the picture there is Fonterra Waitoa, and that just shows the scale of a boiler. It's a 3-story building and a massive kind of parking lot. I think there's some big trucks somewhere in that photo to give it a bit of scale. There's also the consideration about fuel types. So essentially, the rule of thumb really is that the more expensive your boiler build is, you can build it to burn anything, kind of like a hog fuel, and that's a cheaper fuel source. Whereas some of your cheaper boiler and storage installations can only burn wood pellets, which have a higher cost. So there's that whole capex versus opex versus operational stuff trade-off. So it's not like electricity or gas where the fuel is always the same. It's always a gas molecule or an electron. There are different types of biomass which have implications.
I'll just check, Oliver, how many slides do you have to go?
Heaps. I'll accelerate. No, not too many. I think we've already covered this, but for that reason, electricity fuel switching may occur more than what we're anticipating. And so, just less than a month ago, Fonterra announced some big electrification projects at Whanaroa and Edgecombe, which were a little bit different to what our economics would suggest through that program, and that's taking into account some of those operational kind of things. And really want to make this point as well about geothermal. So I haven't mentioned it yet, but geothermal is could be a great option for some of these sites to supply heat. So if you're near some warm stuff under your feet, it could be economic to bring that up to the surface and top that up with a ground source heat pump, or it may be warm enough to use directly as well for your processes. We couldn't include it in the program because we couldn't include it as a pathway because we'd need all of the economic analysis, and it's very site dependent. How deep you'd have to go, what's the flow rate and all that sort of stuff. So we haven't got that level of detail for each of these sites, but it's always a recommendation to these businesses is to include this in your feasibility assessment for your site. So if you're looking at electricity and biomass, also consider geothermal, see what resource you've got, and see if it could work for you. And we've worked with Waikato Regional Council on getting these kind of black dots mapped out for us on this paper, which is some known small geothermal systems, but there could be other hotspots out there that people could tap into. Quick note on some great projects that are happening. So there is momentum, Open Country Dairy in Waharoa went a few years ago, as well as Te Awamutu, AFCO Hortui. They are they're probably the biggest site so far that has transitioned from piped gas to biomass. So there'll be a great example of how they've overcome some of those challenges. And then, Olam Food Agrees, which is a brand new greenfield site, they went straight to a biomass boiler, which is good to see.
I've always found them very happy to share too from their learning experience.
Yes, and that's part of what we try to encourage through this work as well. Like, we've got this analysis, but then it's bringing all these people together and saying, you're the people that have to implement these projects. Let's learn and collaborate, and getting people talking with the biomass suppliers and the network companies about how it could actually all happen. So just a quick final comment on gas. It's a hot topic and there's big changes happening. So, Waikato right in the middle of all of the gas infrastructure, so there's no risk there. You're not at the end of a line or anything like some other regions. And it's using about a quarter of piped gas demand, which fluctuates quite a lot depending on the availability of supply, but this is from 2022. As a fossil fuel, it's not going to last forever, and the projections that carry on coming in have been downgrading the available the volumes available from existing fields, and so that orange line is the most recent adjusted forecast from the Gas Industry Council, and if it follows this prediction, we're going to have half the amount of piped gas available in 6 years than today, which is very significant. And we've already seen Genesis Energy no longer accepting new gas-only customers, and Frank has stopped. Has moved all of its gas portfolio off. Vector has left the gas supply business as well. So we're seeing suppliers cut down as well. And then on the demand side, so we've got direct engagement customers here. Sorry, we've got organisations that ECA has direct account managers with, and we're talking with these large businesses, day in and day out, and we're hearing that they're having trouble getting gas contracts, and pricing is increasing significantly. So we talked before about that 6% price escalation, and that being 29 gigajoules by 2035. We've seen contracts already at that rate, at kind of 30 gigajoules and above, hit the market. And of course, what our message always is know when your contract end date is, because people might think they're sitting pretty because they've got $14 a gigajoule locked in until 2027, but people need to know that at that date you're likely to go to increase. So have a plan for that kind of contract renewal date. And these large projects, years often take years of planning, so you need to start early on these things. There's been various studies over the last couple of years that have looked at, right, if pipes fossil gas is decreasing, where could we get additional supply from, and how much will it cost? So all the projections that I've seen have got any alternatives. The pricing will increase quite significantly from historical levels, which just brings into the economics of transitioning more attractive. And then also, renewable gas. We've got the Eco Gas facility, which is up and running, which is great. It's turning organic waste into usable energy. So it's always good to not waste things, but we need to look at it with a realistic lens of how much available supply could there be from facilities like that across New Zealand. And the reports that have been coming out show 10 to 13 to 15 kind of petajoules per year. At the moment, New Zealand's gas consumption is around 130 petajoules. So there won't be enough for all, and those alternative sources will be more expensive. So at that time, for these large industrial users, yeah, fuel switching still becomes a good option. That's it from me. So, looked at these 91 sites, 12 PJs, 730,000 tonnes, and seen that biomass could be economic out there, but there are some challenges. And yeah, to do with the potential supply for those fuels as well. A note here about, everyone be aware of this, but what we're seeing in the economy at the moment, that businesses and organisations are already financially constrained, and they do have increasing energy costs. So not a lot of companies have got this spare capital out there for big kind of energy projects. They just want to kind of, a lot of them are fighting for survival. So we need to try be empathetic and support them where we can to keep them running. These projects are costly. Yeah.
That was really
That's
interesting. Thank you for that. We have a question from Mike.
Yeah,
Or a
thanks,
comment?
Oliver. Really interesting. And now, obviously, I come down where there's a lot of wood, and a lot of that wood that's used for those boilers actually came out of the Gabriel storm, where it wiped out forestry. My only concern about is that 91 you've alluded to, and also that if these opportunities were taken up, you could halve the emissions. I just feel as though, a lot of forestry was taken down for farmland, and just whether we have now got that resource to not only maintain, even though we've got Kariori and Tanganawai closed down and Kinleith cutting back on to a certain extent, whether we've got the resources. And, again, going back to Stu, how far do you then have to go to move that wood to that source?
Yeah, no, those are great considerations. And what we're going to do when we've completed all of the New Zealand regions is really paint that picture of, nationally what the demand could be, and nationally what the supply could be, and where we might see movement of material. And what we will really want to be flagging to the industry and to policymakers is there enough, and there is lots of competing demands for this material. What would be the kind of hierarchy of use that would be best for New Zealand Inc. out of that? So definitely one that we've got a keen eye on. Yes.
Then we'll go to Ben and then Stu.
Thank you for a very good report. It starts off idealistic and optimistic, but then becomes real and practical. And we don't often get that. You often get reports that are,
One or
we
the
can
other.
save the world in 2036 if we just do this and this. Clearly, even moving to the heat pumps is going to require more electricity at the same time as we're having low years and we're having closures of factories already. But the interesting analysis was the biomass, and that we just don't have the supply in our region. We tend to think of ourselves with lots of forests and assume it's all available, but it's actually not. So two points there. One, can you just mention where you think the biomass might come from? Where would a nature's flame set up?
Yeah, I think that's talking with forest owners, I think it's the export market that the material would come from first. So at the moment, they're at the whim of 3 monthly pricing that comes out of China for the demand for their product, and that has been softening over the last couple of years as the China's construction boom comes down. So instead of that, sending those low-grade logs over the wharf, I think it will come from those sources. And they'd be willing to supply, a 10-year contract for that fibre and have that kind of security in their business as opposed to those 3 monthly price fluctuations. Where it would come in, I'm not too sure at the moment. Yeah, we're going
Where
to
has
do that
got the
analysis.
supply? If we don't have the supply in the Waikato, where does the supply exist? Because there's also, you talk about what can councils do here, consenting for a new nature's flame biomass plant is going to be expensive and
I think he's saying, Ben.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, don't mean to interrupt, that
Yeah.
there is a potential supply there by the stuff that's currently going to China, but it's a very up and down market. Yeah.
But you also seem to indicate that a lot of the supply in the Waikato was already used. Did that indicate you would suggest Gisborne would be the place we want would be set up, or the South Island? And did you have a view on that?
Yeah, I think it would come from within the region. The transport costs, when you add that in, someone mentioned 100 kilometres, no, an hour, around about that 100 Ks, the economics for moving stuff around on trucks just starts not to stack up as much. So I think it would come from within the region, and it would divert those export logs or some of those pulp logs that won't be made into pulp and paper anymore, some of that material. So it might come from this, South Waikato, where it's quite resource rich, or even potentially from Hawke's Bay and Te Rāwhiti, although that is a wee way away. Yeah, we're not too
that's
sure yet,
interesting,
but we
'cause
will wrap it up. Yeah.
When I listened to your report, it seemed to indicate that it wouldn't come from the Waikato. You're saying it could, provided the logs were diverted.
Yes, sorry. So that, and the report will dive into that in a lot more clearer detail. But we first wanted to look at net residues to see if that could supply, because that would be our first port of call. Yeah, and there's not enough net residues.
And I think the point you've missed in this report, which you talk about later on, is Huntly. I don't think you can do this report without actually mentioning Huntly and the need for 1 million tonnes of green waste, which is going to take priority over almost everything else because it generates the electricity that's necessary. So can you include that in your report in the executive summary at a significant level? Because it's obviously going to have a major impact on how the biomass is used.
It's a hot topic.
Yeah, completely agree. We might not be able to go to it in much detail for the Waikato report, but definitely when we do a New Zealand wrap up, we'll look at all the other competing demands. And we have conversations with Genesis about where they're thinking about sourcing their fibre. At the moment, they're a little bit source agnostic. If they get torrefied black pellets delivered to their door, then they don't care so much where it comes from. So that supply, they have set up an MOU with a supplier that's based in Bay of Plenty, and they're in discussions with other organisations in other regions across New Zealand as well. So that supply could come from a longer range, provided it's kind of meets their requirements.
The impression I got from the tour recently that a few of us did was that it's just dynamic still. It is still, it'd be hard to write something down because it will most likely still change.
And the other point is, can we have a copy of this presentation now? Presumably it's been released. It'd be nice to get emailed out. So there's a lot of information that's not in our report.
Should be okay. Our staff have got that. Stu, you're good. All right. In that case, I just wanted to ask a couple of quick questions. And one was, because my main one that came from this was on your last slide around what we can do, but I'll come back to that at the end, or maybe pick that up with you, Oliver, separately so that it can come back in future. But the GIDI fund obviously has wrapped up. Are there any incentives left out there that you are aware of for industry? That was quite a successful one.
Yes, yeah. So ECA did administer the GIDI funds under the previous governments. This government has got new priorities which don't involve capital funding so much for businesses. The support that ECA can provide is all around feasibility and business case developments for both demand side and supply side for the stuff. So we can help with that still, so funding for those studies.
Knowledge space.
There are other avenues, so the regional Infrastructure Fund, the RIF, that Kānoa administers, does have a resilience and energy focus, and so there are some projects that could be related to energy that could potentially be funded through that different government agency. Those are probably the biggest ones that I know of. Yeah.
Okay. And the other one was, have you got any updates on, or whispers that you've heard, or actual information on the National Energy Strategy and the timeline for that? Because we're developing our regional one, just in case you know more.
This is recorded, isn't it? The feeling I get is that there won't be probably a comprehensive energy strategy release. The current government has put it on the back burner, the gas transition plan work, for example, and I think the energy strategy stuff, it will be quite high level, if anything at all. And you can take cues from this government's approach that they really are looking for a market-led solution, and at the moment they're focused on energy security and affordability. So they're in there talking with the generator retailers and the gas industry participants in order to try get them to ensure a secure and reliable supply.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then did you have any comments on how, from your perspective, on what you would want regional councils or even district and city councils to do to assist in what's come out with this work? Otherwise, I mean, I'm just going to catch up with you outside of this anyway, in the interest of time, but is there something that's top of mind for the committee to hear?
Yeah, I think we'll continue to work together in developing these plans. The geothermal, working with what information you've got and helping us connect demand side organisations with that information. Certainly want to feed into WRC's energy strategy with some of this. Helping actual projects come through, there's a role from regional councils to help these organisations through those consenting processes and things like that, because they can take a long time. And
no,
happy to work with anything that you see is related to our work.
Okay, thank you
Just
very much.
One
Ben?
last question. I know we've got geothermal already over at Kawerau. You haven't mentioned that in particular as a site, and it's obviously near a large lot of forests. Is that a potential option?
Kawerau, Bay of Plenty region for us, but yes, certainly that is really important energy infrastructure for New Zealand, and there's some great process heat users there that are using direct geothermal steam for their processes. So there are lots of wood manufacturing, wood processing sites that are already set up there to utilise that. And then there's another one that might potentially go in. This Foresta site has gained consent to put up their site there. The problem being that because there's so much wood processing sites already set up in Kawerau, they've kind of exhausted the supply of wood for that region, within that radius of where that is. So the opportunity to set up, a bioenergy facility there just isn't the material available. But, considering NAFA has got a good geothermal resource and doesn't have any wood processing set up, NAFA up in Northland could be an equivalent opportunity. And, that Tauhara Energy Park, that Contact Energy, are trying to supply geothermal steam to potential customers could be another opportunity.
Thank you. All right, then we'll just wrap it up. I want to thank you again, Oliver. That was really interesting, and I want to wish you all the best with the launch of the actual report. And like I said, we'll be in touch as well. If I've got Ben, I'm happy to move the report to receive, and Mike is happy to second. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. All right, then, yes, thank you everyone for your attendance today and working through these ones and the feedback that you've been able to give the team, and the questions to the presenters were really good as well. I'm just going to go through the karakia and then we can go and have some lunch. So, any last comments, Karen?
No,
You're good. Okay. So, unahia mai te uru tapanui. Kia wātea, kia mama. Te nākau, te tinana, te hinenaro. I te ara takatū, koia rā e rongo, e whakarea ake ki runga, kia tina, tina. Haumie, huie, taike.
Taiki.
Thank you. And that closes the meeting at 12:08 p.m.